The anatomy of consciousness is what allows us to further understand the function of consciousness and better understand ourselves. You are thrown into life without an operator's manual. Who are you? What are you? What are you doing here? These are the questions that spirituality seeks to answer, because if you can't get these questions ironed out, then you're going to spend a lot of time on this plane doing dumb shit, repeating the same mistakes over and over and over again. I don't want you to do that. What I'm going to share with you today is a framework for what I call the geometrics of self. This is a framework that looks at how your conscious self is constructed so that you can start to understand who you really are. All spiritual teachings always begin in the same place. Know thyself. Because once you know thyself, you can then start to understand the reality around you. If you were called to click on this video, you came to the right place. The geometrics of self is a triangle, and I'm going to show you how each point of this triangle corresponds to a specific aspect of yourself. Now, when I first started studying spirituality, I would get very confused hearing different people throw around the same terms to mean the same or different things. And after a certain point, I started asking myself, what is a spirit? What is a soul? What is an astral body? What is a this? What is a that, right? Because all these terms kind of seem conflicting to each other. What I found was that the only way I was going to get any clear answers was by looking within myself and paying very, very close attention to my moment-to-moment experiences and all the thoughts that I had going through my mind. There are 3 different aspects of being that deal with 3 different types of information and can pull us into 3 different directions. Nonetheless, there is still one unifying force that keeps these 3 components together. So let's jump into it. The first aspect of self is the body. The body provides the structural substance of yourself, the muscle, the bones, the sinew, the tissue. It is the aspect of self that is most embedded in the physical realm. However, it itself is not just matter. The body deals with corporeal information. This is information of the senses, of movement, of force. The body has its own aims and objectives. Contrary to popular belief, the body is not evil flesh, as some religions will lead you on to believe. The body likes to experience pleasure. However, pleasure itself can either be of the cheap and fast kind or of the long-lasting and truly satisfying kind. You can either enjoy the high of a Big Mac every single day and 5 years later suffer the consequences of a heart attack, or you can enjoy the high of a 5-mile run and suffer the consequences of not having a Big Mac. The choice is yours. The body becomes accustomed to the pleasures that you program into it, so make sure that you choose your pleasures wisely. The second aspect of self is the mind. The mind exists in a plane that contacts the physical plane and is the entity which brings the brain into existence into the physical plane. The brain can then act as a transmitter and a receiver for the mind. But it's not just the brain that the mind creates. The mind creates the whole entire head. Realize that the brain is the organ, but the head is the apparatus that arises from that organ. Your eyes, your ears, your mouth, your nose, these are all the interactive layer between the mind and the rest of physical reality. And these are all things that are controlled by cranial nerves, which are nerves that arrive directly from the actual organ of the brain. The job of the mind is to process cognitive information for the self so that the self can then make a decision on how to act. The mind decides where the self moves and how. The mind processes information in the form of discrete units called thoughts. The mind desires to bring order and plan for the future. This desire can easily turn into anxiety, especially for a society that prizes this one aspect of the mind above the other two. The third aspect of self is the spirit. The spirit is made of the electrical and magnetic fluids that energize the body. This is what provides the fuel for motion and thought. The spirit is tightly interwoven with emotions, whereas the mind was interwoven with thought and the body is interwoven with sensations. This is why our emotions can have such a dramatic impact on our energy levels. It's because they reside in the spirit and they affect the spirit directly. With this third aspect in place, we can now begin to see how all three aspects are interdependent upon each other. The spirit provides energy to move, the body provides something to be moved, and the mind provides a direction of where to move. Each of the three aspects feeds off the other two in a dynamic relationship. From this interaction, we derive the geometric example of the triangle, which reflects the harmonized activity between these three aspects. By acting directly on one aspect, you can indirectly affect the other two. For example, when you exercise, you're acting directly on the aspect of the body. However, you have an indirect effect on the mind by enhancing your cognitive ability, and you also have an indirect effect on the spirit by lifting up your mood and giving you more energy. When you watch a motivational video on YouTube, the information is entering via the mind. However, it affects your spirit by pumping you up with energy and then affects your body by making you get up and go do something. No one aspect can be affected without affecting the others. With the triangle in place, now we can start to see the fourth aspect, which is the aspect that holds the other three together. And this one is the soul. The soul sits in the middle. From this center position, it can influence and be influenced by the other three aspects of self. The soul is the most critical component of self, as it is the point that acts as the glue for the other three aspects of self in order to create the being that is now you. The triangle is the suit, and the soul is the character within the suit. The soul is the divine breath that allows the being to be animated and then act as an agent of divinity. Now that we understand the structure of self, we can now begin to delve into the function of each one of these three components of self. This is now what is going to open up our understanding to our purpose in this life. Just hang on in there and it's all going to come together at the end. The mind is seated in the head. The spirit is seated in the chest. The body is seated in the gut. Thoughts are transmitted and received by the mind in the head. Once the thought reaches the head, you have several options at that point. Either you can continue to engage with that thought and build on it and reach other ideas and other thoughts, or you can just reject the thought completely and allow space for another thought to take its place. The third option is that you accept that thought as it is, and then you emotionally charge it. This is what now takes that thought from sitting in the center of the head to dropping further that down into the aspect of self and now seating itself in the chest. When this happens, the thought has now become embodied into an emotion because now the spirit has gotten involved. Once that thought reaches the seat of the spirit, it can have an intense impact on your spiritual force and energy. People who have negative thoughts over and over and over again, this is how they become spiritually depleted. Their thoughts turn into emotions, and their reactions to these emotions is what drains their spirit. Once a thought has reached the heart and become an emotion, it can become further embedded in the body and become a physical pattern. Before, it was a mental pattern, then it became an energetic pattern, and now it becomes a physical pattern that embeds itself in the gut and affects the aspect of self that is the body. Once the emotion sits in the body for long enough, it can easily become a belief. And once it becomes a belief, it becomes very difficult to remove this pattern from the body. This is now where disease becomes manifested in the body from these negative emotions that have sat in the physical body aspect of self for a long enough time to become a pattern. On the flip side, this is also how healing can occur, by taking a healing thought, a positive thought, into the mental aspect, down into the spiritual aspect, and further embedded into the physical aspect of the body to enact the healing. Now you can start to see how these three centers work together in an up and down pattern where the energy continuously flows up and down the vertical shaft of the spine. So realize that you have the ability to control your moment-to-moment experience by being very consciously aware of what your moment-to-moment thoughts are. But more importantly, by paying very close attention to which thoughts you would invest emotional energy into. Thoughts that you invest emotional energy into have the ability to penetrate even deeper beyond the physical body and go down into the soul itself. The soul is the last thing affected. It's the seed, the kernel, down at the very center of the being. The soul is hard to touch, but not impossible. When it comes to memory, the soul has its own memory. And those experiences that you have, which engage the mind, the spirit, and the body all at the same time, those are the experiences which tend to penetrate way deep into the soul and stay with you beyond this lifetime. Now, let's talk about balance. At any point in time, you can allow one of these aspects of self to take the lead on your journey. At some point, you may let the mind take the lead, or the body take the lead, or the spirit go ahead and take the lead. We have all seen the person who leads their lives directed by bodily sensations and simply goes from one sensation to the next, to the next, to the next. This is a person who is being led by the physical body aspect of self. Then there's the person that makes every decision from a heart-centered place and lets spirit, emotion, and energy guide the decision-making. Most people in our contemporary Western society let the mind do the guiding. It is based on logical thought, and our society prizes that. But I would say that being guided solely by the mind is no less different than being guided solely by the body or the spirit. If you depend on one aspect too much, it prevents you from getting the information of the other two aspects and prevents you from making a truly balanced decision. This is why I recommend to let the soul do the walking. The soul exists beyond time, and therefore it knows everything that has been and will be. The soul is in contact with, but is not embedded in the illusion of the matrix. The other three components, mind, body, and spirit, are all inextricably embedded into the illusion of Maya. The soul is free of Maya, but only when it becomes self-aware. The being created around it, in other words, the triangle, can sometimes fool the soul into forgetting its true identity and making it believe that it is the triangle, without realizing that it is the thing that exists within and beyond the triangle. This is the aim of spirituality, to awaken the soul to itself, to break the spell of believing that the mind, the body, or the spirit is the self. It's not. It's a supportive aspect of self that exists to assist the soul. This is a very important point, and don't ever forget it. The mind, the spirit, and the body are servants to the soul. They are not the masters. Once you give any one of them the role of master, that is a sure way that you will be taken off your soul's path. Your soul knows where it needs to go. The soul's path can break beyond limiting barriers and give you a reality that you can never imagine is possible. The individual aspects only know how to move across the plane of the triangle, whereas the soul knows how to move vertically beyond the planes. This is how it all comes together. Know the structure of self to understand the function of self in order to illuminate the purpose of self. With this foundation of knowledge, you can now begin to understand who you are and why you're here. It all begins with establishing a connection with the soul. The soul has a language of its own. Learn to speak that language, and you can start to develop a truly integrative and passionate relationship with your own soul. Once you do that, your true life path will open up to you.